And we continue with Chapter 4 of the True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle. When I awakened that time to the sound of 4 bells, I had no idea whether I had slept 1 day or 7. I knew only that I was hungry. I sensed my own filthiness, too, and I had almost desperate desire for fresh air. I lowered myself to the cabin floor and was pleased to find that my legs would, after a fashion, hold. But then as I moved toward the door, my foot stepped on something. I almost fell. Bending down to investigate, I realized I'd stepped on the dirk. When I recalled the circumstances as to why I'd thrown it, I resolved to return the dagger immediately. Remember, a dirk is a dagger and a dagger's a knife. So it was with dirk in hand that I left my cabin and went up the ladder onto the deck, fully expecting to see the same brilliant scene of sky, sails, and sea that had greeted me when I ventured on the deck the first time. But it was not to be. Though the Seahawk heaved and rolled and creaked and groaned, her sails hung limply. The sky was different too, low, with heavy dampness that instantly wet my face, though I felt nothing so distinct as rain. As for the sea, it was almost the same color as the sky, a menacing clay-like gray, and yet it was in constant motion, its surface heavily heaving rhythmically like the chest of some vast, discomforted sleeper. I looked about. A few of the sailors were working ropes and scouring decks with heavy holystones. Their sullen silence, their dirty clothing, was hardly a reassuring sight. And then I realized that one of them, Dillingham was his name, was staring right at me. He was a bearded, bald, barrel-chested man with great-knuckled fists and a perpetually sulky frown. Suddenly I saw that it was not so much me he was looking at, but the blade I held in my hand. Turning abruptly, I tried to hide the dirk in the folds of my skirt. When I stole a glance over my shoulder, I noted that Dillingham had gone off. All the same, the incident reminded me I had come on deck to give the knife back to Zachariah. Concerned mostly that the other sailors not see what I held, I hastily made my way to the galley. Fortunately, Zachariah was there, standing at the bulkhead. I mumbled, "Good morning." The old man turned from his pots. "Ah, Miss Doyle," he cried, "I'm glad to see you, and most pleased to see that you've found what sailors call your sea legs." "Mr. Zachariah," I said, weak and breathless, but holding out the dirk, "take this back. I don't want it." It was as if he'd not heard me. "Would Miss Doyle like some tea?" I continued to offer the dirk. "Mr. Zachariah, please." "Come," he said, "do as they do in big houses. Enter, drink, and eat. When one recovers one's legs, there's still a stomach to contend with. Then perhaps I'll talk with Miss Doyle about my gift." I was not sure what to do. It was the smell of food that decided me. I am very hungry. Immediately he reached into a tin chest and brought out what looked like a flat lump of hard dough. "Would Miss Doyle like this?" he asked, as if offering a fine delicacy. My nose wrinkled. "Ugh, what is that?" "Hardtack, sailor's bread. Come, Miss Doyle, sit." As loathsome as the food appeared, hunger dictated. I stepped forward and settled myself on the stool and took the hardened cake. Meanwhile, I put the dirk in my dress pocket. As I ate, not an easy task, for the biscuit was rock hard and close to tasteless, he busied himself in getting tea. "How long have I been ill?" I asked. "On toward 4 days now." After a moment I said, "I wish to thank you for your kindness during that time." He turned and beamed. "Zachariah and Miss Doyle together." Fearing he was taking liberties, I changed the subject. "Is it possible to go where my trunk is? I need to get some fresh clothes as well as my reading." "For that, you will need to apply to Mr. Hollybrass." He offered me the tea. I took the cup and began to sip it. After a moment I said, "Mr. Zachariah, when I finish my tea, I intend to leave the dirk." The old man studied me. "Miss Doyle," His hand touched his heart. "Believe me, there may be a need." "What kind of need?" I said, dismayed. "A ship, Miss Doyle, is a nation of its own." "Mr. Zachariah, the nations of the earth, Miss Doyle. They have kings and emperors." "And presidents," I added, a loyal American that I was. "Yes, and presidents. But when a ship is on the sea, there's only one who rules. As God is to his people, as a king is to his nation, as father to his family, so a captain is to the crew. The sheriff, judge, and jury. He is all." "All?" I said. "Aye," he said solemnly, "and a hangman too, if it comes to that. Now, Miss Doyle, if ever a man was master of his ship, it's our Captain Jaggery. I saw you on the deck that first day. Did you not mark his words?" I drew myself up. "Mr. Zachariah," I said, "the captain is a fine man." "Do you think so?" "I know so." For a moment Zachariah merely gazed at me with a look of curiosity. Then he turned away and busied himself with his pots. "Mr. Zachariah, why do I need the dirk?" When he paused in his work, I sensed he was trying to make up his mind, and after a moment he turned back to me. "Miss Doyle," he said, "listen." And even as he spoke, he stole a quick glance out the door, crept forward, and lowered his voice. 1 year ago, Miss Doyle, on this same ship, the Seahawk, one poor sailor came under the captain's ire, the captain's judgment, the captain's rage. "Oh, Mr. Zachariah, I don't want to hear personal—" "Miss Doyle has asked," he said, cutting me off. "Now she must listen. That poor Jack went by the name of Mr. Cranach." "Cranach?" I said. "Didn't the captain ask Mr. Hollybrass about him?" "Ah, you do listen." "What about him?" I asked, already sorry I had pressed for this explanation. "Mr. Cranach did not tie a knot to Captain Jaggery's pleasure. The captain punished Mr. Cranach, and punished him hard." "Oh, well, I'm sure this Mr. Cranach deserved it." Zachariah cocked his head to one side. "Miss Doyle, do you believe in justice?" "I am an American, Mr. Zachariah." "Ah, justice for all." "For those who deserve it." "Captain Jaggery said Mr. Cranach's laboring arm was his by rights. Miss Doyle, Mr. Cranach has but one arm now. He was that much beaten by Captain Jaggery, who, as he said himself, took the arm. I was first a surgeon, and then a carpenter to Mr. Cranach." Appalled, I jumped off the stool. "I don't believe you!" I exclaimed. "Justice is poorly served when you speak ill of your betters." It was a phrase I heard my father use many times. "Whether you believe me or not, Miss Doyle, it is true," he said, moving to block me from the exit. It was my turn to offer him my back. "Now that crew," he continued all the same, "each and every jack of them, once ashore, petitioned the Admiralty courts against the captain. It was no use, Miss Doyle, no use. Jaggery had his way. All he needed to say was that Cranach refused a lawful order, and he received not one word of censure. It's a sad commonplace. I've yet to see a master charged." Resuming Chapter 4. "Ah," Zachariah pressed on, "but the captain must sail again. Sailing is his life. He has his reputation for fast crossings to keep up, speeds that bring right profits, but to sail, even Captain Jaggery needs a crew." "Mr. Zachariah, I must beg you to refrain." But Andrew Jaggery could find not one other jack to sign with the Seahawk. They were all warned away. As soon as he said that, my mind went to the Liverpool dock men who fled, the one upon hearing the captain's name, and the other upon seeing the Seahawk. But the next moment I turned and said, "But Mr. Zachariah, what about these men?" "On this ship?" "Yes." "Miss Doyle, I only said other men were kept away." Suddenly I began to understand. "Are these his former crew?" I asked. His eyes were hard upon me now, frightening me. "On the Seahawk?" I demanded. He nodded. "Only Mr. Hollybrass is new." Then he added, "And Mr. Cranach could not sign." I stared at him for a moment and by sheer force of will said, "If Captain Jaggery was so cruel, why should they have signed on again?" Zachariah leaned close to me. "Revenge," he whispered. "Revenge?" I echoed weakly. The old man nodded. "Because of all this, I gave you that dirk." Automatically, my hand touched it in my pocket. "They," he lowered his voice even as he indicated the deck with a movement of his head, "they know your father's name. They know the captain works for him. They assume you'll stand—" "Mr. Zachariah," I cut in with only the voice I had, a faint whisper, "I have nothing but respect for the captain." "Exactly." For a moment neither of us spoke, and then Zachariah asked, "Where have you kept the dirk I gave you?" "Under my mattress." "Miss Doyle, I beg of you, keep it there still." At that very instant we were startled by a noise. We looked around. It was Mr. Hollybrass peering at us from behind his shaggy brows like some spy, his frown indicative of his displeasure in seeing us so closeted. "Miss Doyle," the first mate said, "compliments of Captain Jaggery, and would you be kind enough to join him in his quarters for tea?"